In the 1840s, America was coming apart. Cities overflowed with people. Jobs disappeared overnight. Farms collapsed under pressure. And for millions of families, the idea of a stable future was slipping away. Then a rumor began to spread from the edge of the continent. A place called Oregon. A stretch of land so fertile it was said crops would grow without effort. A distant frontier that sounded less like geography and more like a promise. And slowly that promise took hold. They called it Oregon fever. In 1843, nearly 1,000 people made a decision that would define everything that came after. They loaded their entire lives into wooden wagons. Not just supplies, but memories, identity, and everything they could not afford to leave behind. Then they crossed Missouri and kept going west. Over 100 wagons formed the first massive migration toward the Pacific Northwest. No roads, no rescue, no certainty of survival, only 2,000 miles of unknown land. At first, the world seemed almost welcoming. The Great Plains stretched endlessly in every direction, rolling under a sky so wide it felt unreal. For a brief moment, it looked like the stories might be true. Like this journey might actually work. But the frontier always takes that moment away. The first obstacle wasn't mountains, it was water. Rivers so wide and violent, they had no mercy for mistakes. Wagons were sealed as best they could be, pulled forward and pushed into currents that didn't care what they carried. One wrong step, one panicked animal, one broken rope, and everything was gone. Wagons vanished, supplies sank, entire lives erased in seconds, and that was only the beginning. Because the real danger never announced itself. Hollywood remembers the Oregon Trail as a story of conflict, but the people who lived it remembered something far quieter and far worse. Cholera. It spread invisibly through contaminated water and crowded camps. A man could be laughing in the morning and dead before nightfall. No warning, no treatment, no time to understand what was happening. And the trail began to record what it was taking. Graves appeared along the route like silent interruptions in the landscape. Some carried names, most did not. There was rarely time for ceremony, sometimes not even time for depth. So the trail itself became a line between movement and loss. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Most people never rode in the wagons. They walked beside them, every day, every mile, on feet that never stopped hurting. When animals collapsed, survival turned into calculation. What do you leave behind when everything you own is already barely enough? Furniture was abandoned, pianos left in the dust, wedding dresses, tools, family heirlooms, discarded one by one just to keep the wagons moving. The trail became a silent museum of everything people could not carry. Then the land changed again. The plains ended, and the Rocky Mountains rose ahead. Stone paths so narrow wagons scraped against cliff edges. Wheels cracked under pressure. Oxen slipped on rock that offered no forgiveness. One mistake didn't mean delay, it meant disappearance. And still they climbed, because by then there was no return. Too far from where they started, too invested in what they had already lost. So forward was the only direction left. Until slowly, the world began to change again. The mountains broke apart, the air softened, green returned to the land. And after months of punishment, the Oregon Territory finally appeared. Valleys, rivers, soil that looked almost impossible after everything they had endured. They had made it. But survival never arrives clean. Some families came through together. Many did not, and most carried scars that never fully faded. Still, the journey did not end there, because the 1843 migration became something larger than itself. A path that hundreds of thousands would eventually follow. Towns rose where nothing had stood. Borders shifted across a continent. A nation expanded into its own future. History calls it westward expansion, but that name hides the reality, because the Oregon Trail was never about expansion. It was about endurance under conditions most people would never survive. A journey written in exhaustion, measured in sacrifice, and marked in graves that still lie quietly beneath the soil. So the question remains, if everything you had ever known depended on it, would you have stepped onto that trail?